welcome to Liminal Light, a show that explores the languages of myth and star, earth, sky, tongue, and spirit through weekly astrological forecasts. I'm your host, Chris. Enjoy. On Sunday, February 11th, we began our day with Mars approaching the fixed star Antares, which has been known as Cor Scorpionus, or the heart of the scorpion, as it is the central star in the constellation of Scorpio, which is the southerly most zodiacal constellation, and since it lost its claws to Libra's scales in antiquity and has negligible contact with the actual ecliptic. Multiple cultures have been seen his southerly orientation as evidence for haunting the gateway of the underworld, and his poisonous attacks on Horus and Orion have marked their mythological trials, which ushered them into the realms of the dead. Thus, Scorpio's associations with traumatic transitions, intensity, and initiation ordeals. But what venom is contained in the Scorpion's heart? Antares translates to the anti-Aries, or the rival of Mars, Aries' ruler, as Antares' fiery color and brightness is similar to Mars in the sky. This similarity extends to its significations, in the very scorpionic sense: obsession, passion, zeal, intensity. This is a star that imbues the planet which it touches with an ability to seek success through dangerous extremes and willingly proceed toward objectives through tumultuous states of transition and transformation. There are certainly what doesn't kill you only makes you stronger, no pain, no gain, and shamanic initiation ordeals baked into this star's stuff. As Mars and Antares are already similar in nature and effect, their combination often pushes influences and actions into excess of danger, leading to risk of injury, accident, and disaster, but also martial and militaristic bravery and clarity of focus. This is action without hesitation, and with a Mars very ready in Sagittarius to jump on an opportunity to push the philosophical envelope, it becomes go time for agenda's advancement. Whatever Jupiter digs up in Scorpio that looks nasty enough to incite a riot, Mars will say, "Charge!" and red buttons pressed and witch hunt flash floods flared up so fast you didn't even have time to take notice before the executions and excommunications already occurred. While we watch people spill their guts, we must be wary to not get cornered and succumb to the reactions of those around us that breathe fire or vomit poison. Interestingly, Venus has entered exaltation in Pisces the previous night around 7 p.m. on February 10th, and is already applying to square this revved up Mars. Jupiter, Sagittarius' ruler, is trine by sign to the newly exalted Venus, so this square with Mars is an obvious clash of interest and attitude, but a much needed one. Jupiter could help inform Mars to his own as well as Venus's angle, transferring some benefic perspective to the instigatory firebrand. Catalyst and initiation is often what's called for, and it will be interesting to see if what Venus in Pisces portends makes it over to what we do rather than to just how we feel. In Pisces, Venus turns toward, or really returns toward, the cosmic, the celestial, and the primordial, the mysteries of the genesis of all things, the amorphous fluid alive with potential life that created us all, and to which by Piscean intuition we shall all return as reality dissolves and we all become one once again, melting the barriers and boundaries away between our identities. There is only compassion, imagination, and mystery. An ever-changing, free-flowing, shapeless, emotional, philosophical swirling of spiritual and psychic receptivity, ever-expanding and washing away division. For Venus, this aims her charms at intuitive and emotive forms, rather than the craftsmanship born of laborious efforts in Taurus, or the refined cultural poise exhibited in Libra. Here we have interpretive dance, expressionist painting, improv theater, and ambient music. As she is exalted here, but does not rule Pisces, she has less of an agenda, just seeks freedom, pleasure, fantasy, expression of emotion, and an outlet for psychic insight. It can clearly be seen how this creates an interesting dynamic with Mars in Sagittarius's aggressively motivated target orientation and Jupiter's alchemical ingenuity to turn past poisons into future power potions. The last time we had this triple dynamic was February 7th to February 17th of 1828, a period in which Jules Verne was born, the author of Journey to the Center of the Earth, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and Around the World in 80 Days. The combination of crossing dangerous liminal states for the benefit of expanding understanding, transitory culture-transforming adventure, and the ability to freely fantasize artistically is clearly exhibited. The past 3 years, it was Saturn squaring Venus each time she entered her exaltation, so her boundless expressions were limited by restrictions of philosophy, spirit, and perceived truth. This time, currents of yin crash against fireballs of yang, a much more purely elemental combination, and both planets being of the nocturnal sect are able to use clashing impressions to paint a possibly disturbing yet dynamic picture. While Saturn actually sextiles Venus from Capricorn, where the rules of structures of the Earth are able to work collaboratively with Venus's pleasurable outpourings, like elixir rivers meandering between submerged columns. The Moon joined Saturn in Capricorn, causing us to feel like doing hard things for long periods of time while starving ourselves of needs. This kind of thing normally lowers immune, mental, and emotional strength. When satisfying the self starves the body from working too hard, but with Saturn and Pluto present, there may be an obligation and fear motivating this toil. These are clear minor notes rumbling between the enchanted waters and pounding hearts. These might fall into similar categories to what the Sun sees separating from a square with Jupiter. Tensions arising and untangling and extricating ourselves from karmic traps as we engage with turning pain found in cycles of depravity into opportunities for emotional growth. This seems productive but tricky and sticky. Mercury can help some by facilitating separating logic and emotion, promoting objectivity, although as he advances close enough to the Sun to become combust on this day, much of his intellectual line will be internalized and kept to ourselves. On Monday, February 12th, as the Moon conjoins Pluto at 1 p.m., fears and mysteries, emotional responses to the beyond, the unknown, and the underworld in general send us spelunking into the deepest emotions possible. This is a monthly transit, but exacerbated by Saturn's presence in Capricorn, and is worth mentioning now as we find this dark pulse. Once we submit to the rhythm, it becomes normal, as Pluto is an integral element of the 3-year Capricorn story we are now in. On Tuesday, February 13th, Mercury squares Pluto in the early evening around 6 p.m. EST, forming tensions between conceptual objectivity of intellect and fear, mystery, obsession, the unknown, the deeps. Imagine, for example, coming to understand that a theory you've been working with intentfully, when put into practice, might lead to annihilation. A few hours later, the Sun sextiles Uranus at 9 p.m. Abstract, conceptual, fringe, and out-of-the-box identity, vision, and will can collaborate with performance of pure individual impulse on a revolutionary, chaotic, or epiphonic level. Especially abstract thinking that leads out of complicated entanglement. Simultaneously, Venus steps onto the fixed star Fomalhaut at 9 p.m., which connects an already fully enchanted Venus to a source of mystical poetry. This star marks the mouth of the fish which drinks the water poured from Aquarius's urn, and thus receives the mythical flow of life's fertile emission. Greeks aligned Demeter temples to its rising, and the Persians considered it one of the 4 royal stars, and it was considered the watcher of the south, as Antares is the watcher of the west. Fomalhaut puts what it blesses in touch with an understanding of the nature of all relationships, an ability to intuit the poetry of nature's design, and an ability to operate successfully from this subtle sense rather than from force of will. This is an interesting contrast to Mars's recent visit to Antares. Venus here is dreamier and can even be fanatical in their acknowledgement of the magic of everything around them, which can even lead to the promotion of mystically aligned ideologies. Which is interesting, as Mars is just waiting for useful ideologies to be promoted so he can consolidate them into campaigns. Outside of Mars's seething philosophical maneuverings, a Fomalhaut Venus is a wonderful thing, eminence derived from magical poetry. A great example of a Venus Fomalhaut is Camille Paglia, whose book Sexual Personae follows the currents of decadence from chthonic magic to modern times in contemporary culture. She was known for her fanatical presence as a lecturer and professor. Another example is Marilyn Manson, or on the other end of the spectrum, Hugh Hefner and Benny Hill. Clearly, as we connect all of the above, it's obvious that sexual freedom is also in this combination's nature. We also get Mozart, which reinforces the force of artistic abilities here and the ability to enchant ambiently through instrumental music. On Thursday, February 15th, brings us the next in the eclipse set, which begins the closing of the current eclipse season, a partial solar eclipse in the south node at 4 p.m., which opens portals to purge loosening what dross clings as a lessening of identification with marginalization, abstract, fringe thinking. What was too conceptual or too untethered begins to break up. What ideas are not tied down securely winnow away in the breeze, and probably for the best. What will release of conceptual disentanglement, probably in a certain area of life for each person, depending on their natal chart. A turn away from some form of decentralization in world affairs, such as extremist views, beginning to seem increasingly preposterous, no matter which camp they side on. As it is an eclipse, it is naturally imbalanced, and typically experienced subconsciously, so hard to predict very specific effects. Especially as it is partial, it may be more subtle. It occurs in the 26th mansion, which is good for love, marriage, friendship, health, healing, traveling by land, farming, gardening, and commerce, but bad for sea journeys and building structures. So it may fall along these lines to a degree, but could also be an inversion of them, as it is an eclipse rather than a new moon lunation. As Venus sextiles Saturn around 6 p.m., highly emotional and free-flowing art and fantastical imagination become able to collaborate with boundaries, structures, rules, tests, or strength, strategy, foundation, history, and time, preferring primordially inspired long games such as geological genesis roleplay. Even though this is a soft aspect, any contact between Saturn and Venus tends to bring some discomfort, as there is always some restriction of pleasure in the conversation. But this is the very recipe necessary to turn poetry into stage production, or even published poesy, for that matter, as books require spines. On Friday, February 16th, we may fall deeper into Venus's spell come 11:30 a.m. Friday morning, as the moon conjoins Venus, brings feelings of the imaginative, emotional fantasy and dreams, streams of consciousness, and our needs in sync with the expressive romance. Dancing is likely. 12 hours later, the moon conjoins Neptune at 11:30 p.m., and we get another dose, but this time even heavier on the fantasy, illusion, hallucination, and even drugs and alcohol end. This combination looks like maybe starting out moved and enchanted by the vibes, but becoming inebriated and disoriented by the end of the night. Again, the moon passes Neptune often unnoticed each month, but with Venus co-presence in Pisces, this becomes an event. By Saturday, February 17th, coincidentally, Mars squares Neptune by 6:30 a.m. the following morning, and our amped-up, opportunistic instigator comes clanging into our dream world. Imagine tension and friction, whether productive or destructive, between Shackleton and a languid Dionysus. Maybe there's a bit of a Gira Wrath of God in here, as there could be aggressive attempts to convince others, or be convinced of something that is utterly untrue. We may wake up or lay dreaming about what we'd do with our life if we had all the resources at hand, with an either irritating or inspiring taste to it. Luckily, a half hour later, the superior conjunction of Mercury and the Sun at 7 a.m. occurs, where celestial, divine, and heavenly insight funnel directly into our intellects. This is Mercury on the far side of the Sun from us, completely in line with the Sun's will of abstract concepts of disentanglement, but receiving messages from the heavenly and stellar spheres and transmitting them to where they are in our sight. These are best experienced by active listening, so some Mercury meditation planned for this moment usually reaps fantastic results, especially if you are already in deep by the time the alignment perfects. Maybe ring a bell or light a candle on your Mercury altar at the moment of conjunction to center the aspect, surrounded by aniseed stars and clothing of indistinguishable colors, with transceivers switched on and coins organized into number and letter formations. Going an extra step for this superior conjunction is not a bad idea, as Mercury ingresses into Pisces around midnight, entering detriment, so get your divine messages while you can. Mercury organizes and separates the minutiae of logic, language, process, and concept, whereas Pisces dissolves all boundaries so everything can be let go as all becomes one in love for the universe as it flows away. Mercury in Pisces is not unlike language and logic and travel on acid. Maybe more of a good trip normally than a bad, but psychedelics can be great for poetry but bad for book reports. Things become more artistic and impressionistic, but also confusing and often impossible. Logic becomes stuck being artistic. Non-artistic types tend to suffer more here, while artistic people are struck by unusual inspiration, although with a tendency to neglect responsibilities. Saturn and Capricorn will punish this behavior, so it would be good to schedule and strategize for this poetic period beforehand. Also, whatever process of separation that intellect and emotion in Aquarius' third decan is utterly lost. Logical objectivity swerves back to subjectivity heavily. Everything is felt more than analyzed, and we are immersed in a world judged by parameters of either good or bad vibes. Perhaps Saturn's sextile by trine to Pisces will allow the pragmatic and the mystical, the sticklers and the structure phobic to work together and help each other out, and perhaps create something both wondrously weird and structurally stable. Welcome back to the show, Bonnie.
Hello, and welcome back, Maralie.
Yeah, our first guest, Maralie, is back on the show to join us again. How you doing, Maralie?
Doing great.
And you've also returned from a trip recently?
Yeah, I returned from visiting Montevideo, Uruguay.
And then you had gone to visit family?
Mm-hmm. I went with my mother, who's from Uruguay, and we were visiting cousins and uncles and cousins of cousins of cousins and that sort of thing.
And then, yeah, and you left right around Christmas time?
Yeah, we left just after Christmas.
Yeah, and so, yeah, that's really interesting because, how did you describe your experience?
Amazingly mundane.
Yeah, we're chatting about this before we hit record. It's like amazing because that's right after Saturn went into Capricorn. I think even like if anyone caught our show right before Christmas time, we were like warning people, that like there's going to be the Venus Saturn conjunction right on Christmas, and that it's like people are going to be forced into a traditional Christmas aesthetic or beware.
Yeah.
So it's really able to appreciate like a big block of Saturn's mundaneness, with a Venus there as well. It's like that you were like taking a lot of pleasure in just things being like really by the book.
Oh yeah, so much.
Yeah, and also that's Venus in Capricorn will give you an appreciation of the land itself and like the deep meaning of the land and the deep connection of like pleasure to like what's even under the earth and in the earth. I'm sure.
Something
that
was interesting was there were a couple traditions that I always excuse me, grew up thinking were my like family traditions, like just coming from my abuela. And when we were there over New Year's Eve, the last work day of the year, people start throwing their calendars out the window, out of the office buildings, you know. So it's like Friday before New Year's. It's like confetti, but the confetti is completely made of last year's calendar and date books, which was really cool experience. And then kids were also throwing water balloons off of the top of the buildings and dumping buckets of water. And my abuela had always done that, like at the strike of midnight, she would dump a bucket of water out the door. But I didn't know it was like this particular part of that city. They would do that off of the buildings too.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, and that's really great too, as like Saturn significations of time, you know, and it's kind of, you know, Christmas coming from being transposed, you know, they think because it's not accurate to, there's multiple guesses as to when maybe the historical Christ child was born, but none of them are December 25th. And that's pretty clearly has to do with the solstice, but also is pretty much centered like on the big celebration that would have come before the Christian era in Rome was Saturnalia, you know? So it's like the time that like, it's going to get really Saturny as the sun enters Capricorn. So let's do all the like non-Saturn stuff, you know, let's literally throw our calendars out the window for a minute. That might even harken back to then, you know, they were like, yeah, let's like throw the like the hourglass out the window and smash it in the street, you know.
Off the tallest mountain.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, it must have been really good during that period with it being Saturn and Capricorn and Venus and Capricorn as well to visit family and ancestors and be deep in the land and everything.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and so now we are entering a much different period. Saturn's still in Capricorn, of course, but we have a pretty interesting lineup of planets that I didn't realize how long ago it had been since some of these dynamics had come together. The thing I was most interested in was Mars in Sagittarius, while Jupiter is in Scorpio and Venus is in Pisces, because you get Mars squaring Venus by degree as soon as she comes into Pisces, but by sign anyway the whole time. But then you have Mars and Jupiter in each other's signs. We started to talk about this last week, that what Jupiter digs up out of like pain and out of what's hidden and out of the past and out of the deep psychological scapes of Scorpio, Sagittarius is like, oh, that's great, let's use that because I have like an agenda, whether it's a political agenda or like any sort of campaign. You know, anyone who's like avidly campaigning is going to get like that kind of boost of ambition and energy and aggression from Mars and Sagittarius. But but Pisces is saying like, you know, coming from Aquarius moving into Pisces, and that's her exaltation. She's like, let's get into like free form art, like interpretive dance and expressionist painting and love and free love and like intoxication and enchantment. And so higher level. A higher level. And so it's an interesting, you know, and of course, because they're Venus and Jupiter then are trine because they're both in water signs, and Mars is square to Venus by being in Sagittarius. So it's a really interesting dynamic. And I was like, well, let's see what happened last time they were in those signs. And I ended up having to scroll back all the way to February 7th of 1828 to find that combination last time.
What happened
No way.
Yeah, so which was pretty crazy. And I found you know, when you go back that far, plenty of stuff happened, but not a lot of it is readily cataloged into Wikipedia. You know,
Sure.
One thing
got to be big.
It's got to be big, yeah, totally. And it's usually like it's wars, you know, like,
right.
So you're like, oh, this is a very like warlike aspect, but no, there's always
there's always a war.
Yeah, that's
definitely
always what there's mentioned.
It's always reported.
Yeah. But what I did find was so this was the last time those three planets were in those three signs was February 7th, 1828 to February 17th. So only 10 days too. And I didn't go back to look when the last time it happened before that was, but on February 8th of 1828, you have the birth of Jules Verne, who wrote 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and around Journey to the Center of the Earth and around the world in 80 days. So it's really interesting to see that like adventurous kind of like motivated exploratory Mars, and then that kind of like liminal crossing Jupiter for the like expansion of consciousness and opportunity culturally, and then that like kind of free thinking, free form kind of thinking Pisces art, you know, because he's considered one of the forefathers of science fiction writing.
Wow.
So yeah, that was definitely an interesting combination to dig up. The other aspect that I thought was really interesting was that Capricorn is in, I mean Saturn is in Capricorn, and that's sextile to Venus, where like the past 3 years Venus, and every time she reached her exaltation, was square to Saturn because he was in Sagittarius. But now in Capricorn it's ultra Saturn, like a super strong testing, foundational, kind of like not taking any crap kind of Saturn, you know, like you're the real taskmaster, but being sextile to Venus now, saying like, okay, we can work together somehow. So you have like this complete like, you know, free jazz mystical poetry, like new age Venus, you know, like being like working with just like the architect of time, you know. And so I looked at that.
It's like Tracy Pugh.
Yeah, like Tracy Pugh. Yeah. But also I looked at that and I was like, okay, let's try to find, it reminded me a lot of so it's like fantasy, and the Pisces aspect is like heavy fantasy. Then the Saturn aspect is like heavy categorization and big timescapes. And I was like, yeah, well that works. Like every like fantasy novel enthusiast and Dungeons and Dragons person can think kind of along those lines. So I looked up Tolkien's chart, and he has Saturn and Capricorn sextile, like tightly sextile to Jupiter in Pisces. And so I thought that was like kind of an interesting, it's not Venus in Pisces, but you know, if there is this opportunity to hit this kind of like Jules Verne Tolkien kind of thing.
Yeah.
So like kind of, you know, long form structured fantasy. Have you been feeling it, Maralie, in your creative output recently?
Yeah, I think I have. Definitely the long form aspect of it.
Yeah. Well, as we're recording this, Venus hasn't hit Pisces yet. She'll hit Pisces on February 9th. So just a couple of days from now, you can fall into that part of it, which is going to be so.
February 9th.
Yeah.
Tomorrow.
Yeah. So there's a lot of like dance signature with Venus and Pisces. Do you have any? You just had a performance, right?
We just had our first Human Beast show in New York since moving here.
Wow. And
it was great, and now we feel ready to play more shows. So we have a couple more lined up in the spring. Yeah, and just being here long enough now where getting to meet people and meet them creatively and find out ways we can collaborate or just like make space for each other. Actually, somebody was talking to me about movement practice, and so there's this possibility of doing something with a group that I've always done privately.
Oh, cool! Like doing like movement dance sort of stuff, but with a group that you've worked with but you haven't performed with.
I haven't worked with them.
Oh, okay.
At all. Yeah. It's interesting because it's just like it's not performance based. It's just practicing movement together in a space as a group, but then also being able to individually practice in that space at the same time.
Yeah, that's really nice.
So it's just, are you all going to be collaborating on like renting a space? Is that what it's about, or?
Yeah, I think there's somebody involved in the group has the space. I'm not
wow.
entirely sure yet. This is just something that's coming up. And so for me, it's like this whole new frontier of thinking of moving with a group of people, especially people that I don't already have like close friendships with.
Mm-hmm. That's a cool way to bond a friendship through movement. And
Totally.
Yeah, and so is there like kind of like a metaphysical intention behind it? Like you're like, yeah, these are the moves we're gonna do, and then this we can take this and do it as a group, but then also do it by ourselves, and it's not really performance driven as much as just like connecting and kind of moving the body and moving the spirit and the mind.
Definitely. Absolutely that.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's kind of like what's Lynn Taggart, is that her name? Who was just on Rune Soup, who was talking about the power of eight.
McTaggart, I think.
Yeah, Lynn McTaggart. And about like group prayer and like the crazy results people were getting from sending positive intention to other people in groups. Just reminds me of like just any kind of like, we're going to get together and do this kind of intense connective thing in a group, and then, you know, we can take that and it's some form of magic or some form of healing, you know.
It's totally got that whole like Leo, Aquarius axis.
Yeah,
also,
totally. Yeah, the dynamic between the center, the central, the individual, and the self versus like the group, or like the decentralized, like outer kind of like conceptual entanglement of concepts.
Mm-hmm.
The outer or the inner.
Sun in Aquarius too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'll be really nice, Maralie, for this whole Pisces season coming up.
Nice. Love how that kind of stuff works out.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
It's like magic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Written in the stars.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. You can really take advantage of that, you know, whether you're doing like a kind of a personal practice kind of movement group, or, you know, I was looking at this Fomalhaut when Venus, it's the 3rd degree of Pisces, basically like between the 3rd and 4th degree, the fixed star Fomalhaut, very like mystical, poetry oriented, and even kind of can become kind of fanatical, you know. It's just, it can see the magic in the universe and how everything is interconnected, and kind of can describe those dynamics, has the ability to describe it. So you'll see it in the charts of poets a lot. But I saw that a couple of people that have their moons there who are able to like emote this magic, but they don't necessarily have the rest of their planets making them like a really like trippy person. Is Elvis Presley has his moon on Fomalhaut, and so does Frank Sinatra.
What? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So like you get this like, and I think during the forecast I was talking about people that have Venus on Fomalhaut, and you get Camille Paglia, you know, who's totally, you know, just always describing the magical interconnectedness of art and sex, you know, like and she totally personifies that fanatical nature of it too. She's like a fanatic for that, you know. And Marilyn Manson has that.
Wow.
Venus on Fomalhaut, very fanatical, and also and people fanatical about him, you know. And also Hugh Hefner.
Oh wow.
And Benny Hill.
Oh my God.
So if you look at all of them in combination, you're like, yeah, there's definitely a sexual signature with Venus on Fomalhaut. And even, you know, Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley, definitely a sexual signature, but it's this kind of like sexual, like the sexual magic beneath everything that connects everything, you know. So as Venus enters Pisces, you're going to get some of that dynamic happening, and then you get the whole like exalted Venus for the whole time she's in this sign. But those first couple degrees, if you go back and look at the written forecast, you can see what day and hour it happens on, if anyone wants to start like a poetic, sexual, magical project at that moment.
That sounds wonderful.
Might be a good day to start your group, you know.
Yeah.
What's the date again?
Or
well,
maybe just a poetry sex workshop.
yeah, totally. Yeah. Everyone out there, just let's have like a mass worldwide poetry sex workshop. I wish I had like thought of that earlier. That would be like consume my whole year, you know.
Instead of this week's forecast.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Instead of my entire life. Nice. So, anything else you have coming up that that's going to work well into some of these aspects we're talking about?
Well, this idea of like the we were talking earlier about the long haul, or like the long form. Yesterday I spent a good chunk of the day just like organizing my space and projects that I've started, but I haven't even thought about what they're going to look like or how they're going to happen. And I was just realizing I need to just focus on this one thing, take weeks or months or however long to do it, and then just know that everything else is still there that I could pick up at another time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
That's so big.
Yeah, that's going to be a big thing as Saturn is in Capricorn for 3 years, for that people remember that, like, okay, this is okay. This is going to be here for a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think when Ryan really was on, we were talking about that, and he had suggested purple fluorite to help with that. I remember that was the one stone I got. I said, oh my God, I need this so bad, because that is always a problem I have with tons of ideas.
I think he was saying that
many pots boiling, you know, like
it breaks you out of cyclical thinking too. Yeah. So that you can kind of move forward with your ideas instead of just like always everything's like circling and bumping into itself in your mind.
Yeah.
So you feel good about that, huh?
Yeah, totally. That's funny because purple has been coming up a lot lately too.
Yeah. And some you'll see some traditional texts that assign purple to Saturn. That's usually like the purple violet thing is very Mercury, but you'll get that darker kind of like more kind of dusky, evil looking purples and greens like with Saturn as well. But yeah,
evil looking purple and green. I like that.
Green. Yeah, I mean you can see it. You put the three together, black, purple, and green.
The grapes of wrath.
Yeah, the grapes of wrath. Yeah. you definitely get like a villain costume coming together. Yeah, and so we've an eclipse this week, which
Side note,
yeah. Which I looked into the Sorrow series because I love to do this, and I realized it was very intertwined with Sorrow's 145, which is what the January 31st eclipse was. And right off the bat, I was like, okay, I think and they've been kind of intertwined for years. I'm not sure how far back I want to say, but at least to 1909, you're getting these two in one eclipse season, often in proximity to one another. And so this Sorrow series of the February 15th eclipse is Sorrow's 150, and it began in 1729. And right off the bat, like within days of that eclipse, you get the largest comet ever seen. It's still the largest comet ever recorded, they think, that was seen in the sky. And so I was saying a bunch with that Sorrow's 145, there you get a lot of stuff falling out of the sky. There was like a big meteor in British Columbia that like one of the last times. So like I think that was like maybe in the 2000s or the 80s series, but this one's pretty interesting. I didn't see like a super strong single theme going through all the Sorrow's 150s, but you got a couple events popped up on there. Besides the largest comet ever seen was Coolidge versus New Hampshire was on one in 1964, which is the big Fourth Amendment trial that had to do with like search, investigations where they had to like search people's houses and being like, okay, yeah, we can't search without a warrant kind of thing. And then
the Beast of Gévaudan.
Yeah, the beast of, how do you say it, Bon?
I think it's Gévaudan.
Gévaudan, which is like this, all these wolf attacks. So they weren't sure if they were monsters or real wolves, or a giant pack of wolves, or an extra large breed of wolf in France. And Francois Antoine announces that he has killed the beast of Gévaudan, like on 1765, September 21st. And
there actually was more, though.
Yeah, there turned out to be more.
Short-lived victory, but
yeah. You see a lot of first or biggest events in sky, space, and flight. Also a bunch of wars and treaties, which I know I said that you'll always get that looking in history, but I noticed that more than anything else, that either like a war over territory or a dispute over territory or the signing of treaty, it was like it could go either way. And a lot of emphasis to the southern hemisphere, which was interesting. So it's kind of an odd one. With some of these rhythms, you'll get really obvious, like this makes like earthquakes happen, or this makes like the Saras 145 had a lot to do with like the making or consolidating of big entities, like we were saying, like the UN, the CIA, even like Beatlemania. And Saras 150 might share some of that signature, but it looked like more loose and more kind of, it was interesting, more impressionistic, which is kind of like the theme that we're moving into anyway. Things like kind of breaking up abstraction, unnecessary abstractions, kind of clearing out, and then going into like a more kind of like emotional, impressionistic period, at least for a while the Sun and Venus and Mercury go into Pisces, which is a more mellow period and kind of like a much needed turn right now.
Yeah.
Some of the pressure is off. So I think that's really interesting how that might affect like the Winter Olympics, you know?
Oh, right.
As like we go into it, you have that Mars and Sagittarius, that like foreign competitive action kind of dynamic, and like the first half of the Olympics is going to be an Aquarius season, and it's very like intellectual, like intellectually tense, and then halfway through you have the Sun and Venus all going into Pisces, and so the second half of it, I was wondering if there's going to be like a change in performance style as people go into like a more like emotional competitive emotional mode.
Right. Or like some big story breaking from the camps.
Yeah, totally.
You know?
Yeah, some big drama, like some really tripped out drama. Like, or it's just like, it doesn't, you're like, this doesn't even seem real. It's like this hallucinatory Olympics drama.
Right.
Which I guess is already kind of happening with like everyone's getting sick there. Yeah, and then you'll get I thought also it might make the figure skating and the freestyle skiing competitions more interesting.
Oh yeah.
You might get some of those like villain outfits that we were talking about on skaters.
Evil purple.
Yeah, some evil. Yeah, look out for evil purple on the Olympics, I guess is what we're saying. Yeah, and so we have Neptune in Pisces, so it's really interesting to see now, like this, it's Pisces time, which like with Capricorn, you're like, okay, Pluto's in the house, and now as things are moving into Pisces, we're like, okay, let's see what's up with Neptune. And I just read about Neptune yesterday, and I guess Uranus as well, that they found this substance on there called superionic ice, which is both a solid and a liquid at once. Mm-hmm. And they recreated the conditions that would be necessary for this to exist, because it has to be like 25,000 times more pressure than the Earth's atmosphere, you know?
Wow. Because
it's in the mantle of Neptune and Uranus. And so I think they did it by squeezing 2 plates of diamond with water in between until it was like, and somewhere around like 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit, it was frozen from pressure, but made super hot. And instead of, it was conductive to electricity, but instead of negative electrons flowing through, it created a lattice structure, so it was a solid but had positive ions flowing through, so it's also a liquid. And they think that might be responsible for why those planets have a lopsided magnetic field. But it just reminded me so much of Neptune's signature in general, that it's like, it's a solid and a liquid, and Neptune's the one that like feels very much like when you're induced into a consciousness state that you're like, the walls are melting, you know?
Right.
Or like you look up the staircase and you're like, it's a river, you know? But yeah, that's, you know, Neptune's perfect in Pisces. So, and then what were you saying last time happened? What Neptune was in Pisces was?
Oh, was that when Rudolf Steiner was born?
Yeah, was it Rudolf Steiner was born? And
yeah, it was spiritualism.
yeah, spiritualism was huge in America.
An emphasis on communication with the dead.
Yeah.
It became wildly popular in the U.S.
Yeah, necromancy was wildly popular.
Oh, and the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared to Bernadette Soubirous at Lourdes, France.
Yeah, so
yes, and Rudolf Steiner was born.
Yeah, so you get like basically the father of biodynamic gardening, and then, you know, now you have like huge permaculture movements, and pretty much everybody does yoga, and there's like a
Right.
You can get meditation advice from Oprah. You know? All we need is the widespread necromancy. You know?
Yeah.
I think that's gonna happen.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think Saturn and Capricorn with Pluto and Capricorn is really going to facilitate that. I mean, it's definitely happening within occult circles, you know, a return to a spirit-based practice, but
just ancestors in general, just
yeah, people just like not thinking like, oh, my family they're dorks, you know.
Right.
And going beyond that barrier and getting really deep and going generationally back, you know. Picking
Even
up.
just the rise in people getting DNA tests.
Yeah,
yes,
totally.
That's
yeah, that's a
I
really
never
good
thought
point.
of that. It's amazing.
Have you done that?
I actually got them from my parents.
Oh, cool.
So I
Like
feel like I'm
doing it.
pretty well taken care of.
Yeah.
What'd you find out?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting, Maralie, what you had showed me before, those crazy signatures that you found of your ancestors.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's so interesting because, you know, my parents having grown up on completely different continents, different hemispheres, they both have shit tons of Irish and Spanish ancestry, and there's even some moments where the region's way far back in time, but where those families kind of cross some of the same regions.
Yeah, it's wild. Yeah, where you
It
see
is,
like
yeah.
both lines were intertwined already so far back. Even if it wasn't necessarily like through one specific marriage or something, it was like culturally, but you have no idea. Maybe, you know,
Right.
those people
Yeah,
could
totally.
have mingled before, which I often think is probably the case. I think with some ancestral experiences, there's some sort of like people are drawn to each other again and again, you know.
Oh, yeah. And drawn to places.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's places, like specific locations always, or sometimes it's just like maybe signatures of, you know, just thinking of it from an astrological perspective. If one family line has like keeps having all this Saturn in their chart, are they drawn to like dryness and rocky places, you know? Or
Right.
when can you mark the inception of that genealogy, you know?
Yeah.
Can you say a few words about those signatures? That was really interesting.
Oh, yeah. So she's a great, I think 28 great grandmother on my father's side. And she was actually like a queen. Her name was Urraca of Portugal.
Wow.
And she's the queen of this area that is now Portugal, but it was also part of northern Spain. And what's interesting is that region is where my great-grandfather on my mom's side came directly from
Wow.
to Uruguay.
Wow.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, and just the way they looked aesthetically was amazing too.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's such... to even think about someone having a signature. It was like a sigil.
Yeah. Yeah, they looked so much like some of the goetic seals for some of the spirits that they looked like Grimorium Verum especially, but some of the other Bibliothèque Blue like seals of certain characters, very sigillic looking. And then it made me think, if some of these spirits are supposed to be some of them are elementals, or some of them harken back to like pre-Olympian traditions or things like that, but some of them are just perhaps believed to be like dead magicians at some point who just picked up magical traditions or witchcraft or grimoires, and then they got so good at being a magician they got incorporated into these spirit hierarchies after they were deceased. They're just members of the tradition that way at some point, and that they actually are giving you their actual signature that they used when they were alive.
It's amazing.
They're like, oh yeah, this is how you call me, here's my John Hancock. But that would open up a whole other portal, looking at signatures like that. Once you showed me those, I'd never seen anything like that. Because what are the years on them?
Let's see, let me pull it up real quick. Let's see. I found her signature and her father's signature.
Yeah, I think it was like from like the year 1000 or something.
Oh yeah, totally. It was like 11 something.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah, which is really amazing. Yeah, that could be a whole other vortex, and that's also very perfect for this Saturn and Capricorn time, especially while Mercury is still in Aquarius. But they're gonna keep going back around, and again, it's gonna be like hands on a clock coming back around to Capricorn Aquarius, like while Saturn is for the next 6 years, really.
Yeah, let's see, she was 1148 is the year she was born.
Wow. Yeah, so I guess we're encouraging listeners now to go get DNA tests.
Find those signatures.
Yeah. Start some sort of like emphatic psychedelic group. Find your ancestors' signatures. Start calling their spirits.
It's a good time for it.
Yeah, with a group or by yourself.
Bring necromancy back.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Make sure you have a warrant before you search someone's house. Write like a 1,000-page fantasy novel. Oh, another one I saw that was really, because I had mentioned Mars passing by Antares during the forecast, which is Antares is like anti-Aries, as in it's the rival of Mars. It's like it's Mars being Aries ruler, and it's orange, like red, like Mars in the sky, and kind of as bright as Mars. It's the heart of the Scorpion, the heart of the constellation of Scorpio. And the only example I have that I took notes of is that people with Antares and angles around planets, especially on the ascendant, tend to have kind of accidents and kind of like violent deaths in their life. And so one person is Gandhi, who totally has that Mars Sagittarius thing. It's like a way to kind of conceptualize that. Someone who is just so amped about a philosophy. They're so motivated to the point of being a martyr for this philosophy, You don't think of Gandhi as like aggressive like Mars, but that's someone who definitely like pushed the envelope and got physically involved in their motivated philosophy, and was assassinated in the end. So
even just do intense fasting. He actually ruined his body through fasting and continually walking.
Yeah, and I would have to look at like the rest of his chart to see. There's probably some other like K2 signatures or some other ascetic signatures that motivate that. But yeah, that just to illustrate that Antares action, which we're gonna get on the day this broadcasts is the day Mars goes over it is already there. If you're listening to this, Mars is on Antares, so be careful if you're thinking about like, you know what, I am going to do that, and like rev up your truck and go like, I'm really motivated by this philosophy, and like you could easily get into an accident, you know. So yeah, if you get too motivated to write this fantasy novel or do some necromancy or you know,
right,
then, you know, be careful, take it easy, at least today. Wait till the end of the week when Venus is on Fomalhaut.
You're supposed to be very nice to dogs at this time for this eclipse.
Yeah.
So do kind things for dogs.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another more advice that we have today. Yeah, and that's a part of K2's signatures. You know, the dogs that hang out around the temples and the holy sites and the cremation grounds, like in parts of the world today, but in the Western world, it's something that we remember from antiquity, but there's plenty of places in the world where that's still going on. Did you see any cool dogs on your trip?
Oh, yes. My uncle's dog is such a big, beautiful dog named Magnate.
Wow. Is that a breed that's particular to the region?
Actually, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But that's his name. I don't know what breed of dog he is, but he's just this massive, enormous dog, but he's really sweet and loving. So I kicked it with him a lot. Fed him large, like lamb bones.
Very kind to animals.
Yeah, so I guess maybe we'll leave this broadcast there for today. Everyone go be kind to animals.
Right.
Dogs. And yeah, go be kind to dogs, which kind of goes right along with calling up your ancestors, finding their signatures, getting your DNA test.
Meditate with K2.
Yeah, meditate with K2, write a fantasy novel, do some interpretive dance, and be careful to not get assassinated.
Feed the hounds of hell.
Thanks, Maralie.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Liminal Light. Our theme music was composed by the ever-talented Asa Irons. Our guest today was Maralie, musician, performer, video artist, and teacher, among other things. You may know her from Human Beast or her solo work as Valise. Find her incredible work at Maralie.com. Our background sound is by Failings, the creative pseudonym of Portland, Oregon's Ian Hawk. I'm your host, Chrissy Puccieri Rapucci, and you can find me at atavisceral.com, where I post articles and forecasts, offer chart readings, talismanic concoctions, occult services, tarot, divination, and more.